You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, Sunday, October 8th, 2023 at noon. Very unusual time for me. It feels very unnatural to be up here talking during the day, but so be it. Today we're doing something special. This is the first sort of board game development, game design diary update. I'm not sure exactly what to call it. But I'm going to be talking about High&Low, the detective narrative mystery board game, tabletop game that I've been working on off and on for over 6 months now. And this series will be focused on this game, but today will be really focused on this game. But in future episodes, which I think we'll do once a month or so, I'll spend some time looking at different games and seeing what we can cull from them, what game design ideas we can learn from them, good or bad. Before we get started today, let's do a little bit of bookkeeping. I think there probably won't be a 3 p.m. Dear Holmes play-by-mail letter session today. Normally we do that at 3 p.m. on Sunday. I do have the new letter, but I think I'll probably be burned out after this. And it probably is not a bad idea for us to sort of build up a backlog of those letters so that when they don't arrive in time, we don't have to interrupt things. And as you know, October will be playing a bunch of sort of deluxe, creepy, scary, atmospheric games. I have a couple of deluxe ones that were suggested to me by the Puzzle People Facebook group. They know their stuff. There are some experts there. And Root of All Evil, Witchery Spell, a couple of them. If you're interested in finding out that schedule and helping us decide exactly which games to play, there's a Board Game Geek Guild for this channel. There's a link on the About page. And I also put in the description of this video a link to that guild and a forum section for discussing High&Low, and also a download link for the map atlas and a bunch of different files if you just want to peruse them on your own. They're all drafts, but there's some story from the game, nothing too spoilery. And in general, this video, I will not spoil anything important about the story of High&Low. Okay. Let's get started here. Where is my slides? Okay, here we go. So let's do a little outline here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the format of the live stream. Then I'll talk about High&Low. What exactly is it? What motivated it? And then I'm going to talk about how I conceive it as being these two different parts, two different projects, really. And then we'll spend some time looking at the documents, which I am excited to show you and get some feedback on. Talk a little bit about some of the key ideas, some of the new mechanical ideas I'm interested in. And then I'm going to talk about what kind of help I would really benefit from. I really do want collaborators on this project. A bunch of people in the channel have been helping me. And the more this can be a group project, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And then if we have time, we'll talk about a little bit of YouTube, some other recommended YouTube channels, and games if you want to get yourself up to speed on this genre. Okay. And, okay, so the format of this, because of YouTube delays, it's always very difficult and frustrating. I find it frustrating when I watch streams and the person will ask a question and then there's a 10-second delay before they get replies, whatever. So I'm just going to fill air and talk. I've got plenty to talk about. I think I'd probably go an hour. We could go more. And you should feel free to ask questions, make suggestions, or talk amongst yourselves. And then I'll occasionally check in on the chat and respond to questions. Having said that, I'm happy to spend time. If you guys want to talk about the documents and ideas there, we can spend time there. If you want to talk about the story stuff, we can spend time on that. If you want to talk about your own projects, we can do that. I already mentioned the PDFs. And I know some YouTube channels don't like it when people talk about their own channels or projects, whatever. But here you are free to talk about it. And if someone asks a question that you know the answer to, you can answer them already. All right, so High&Low, what is it? I think the best way to explain it is that it is a narrative mystery detective game in the spirit of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. That's its closest cousin. It's very closely related to that game and the spin-offs of that, which include Gumshoe and Mythos Tales and Bureau of Investigation and Razorhurst and Postmortem LA, that whole family of games. This one is set in New York City in the 30s, 50s range. People often ask me, where does the name High&Low come from? It comes from one of my favorite films of all time, Akira Kurosawa movie called High&Low, which is a film noir police procedural, which was itself taken from a New York City film noir book novel, 19th Precinct book, whatever. And I love the sort of implied meanings of that word. It's sort of Manhattan is the highest of the high, the rich, and the lowest of the low, and you're searching high and low. It just feels to me like a very loaded term that captures this sort of feeling. And the motivation for me for working on this project, I guess, is twofold. One is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is one of my favorite games of all time. It's a bit divisive. Some people love it, really love it. Some people don't. I want to set that in New York City in the 30s, 40s, a sort of noir take on it. That's motivation one. And motivation two is that we've played 1,000 hours of these games. And one of the things that I love to do is talk about what works, what doesn't, and why, and criticize certain things and talk about how could this have been done better? What new ideas could you bring to this genre? So the other motivation for me for working on this is as a sort of laboratory for trying some of these theories about how to do things differently. And I've listed a couple of those issues here, trying to handle time and events differently. It's a thing that designers keep trying to do in this world, in this genre, and it's very hard to get it right, and I have some ideas about that. I want to try to tackle the issue of difficulty level a little more robustly. I think it's a problem. Either the games are too easy, or they're hard, but they're fragile. And if you miss something, then the whole case falls apart and you can't solve it. And that leads to some behavior while playing, worrying about if you've seen everything, etc. And I think I have some ideas on how to solve those things. And then something I talk about all the time in these games, creating sort of compelling moral, psychological choices. And then addressing this issue of score and trying to finish these cases quickly to get a better score makes no sense to me. To me, this game is about reading and having that experience of sort of being in a story, in a novel. And so I have some theories that I've talked about as we've critiqued games about emphasizing narrative reward and making choices sort of moral and psychological. And I see Martinez Conradi is here, the author of some of my favorite Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective fan cases, who's I've been talking to and getting some advice about. And you do well to check out Martinez's fan-made games. I did a video looking at them at some point. Okay, let's see. No question. Who are we as players in the game? We are a character. I mean, I'll show you some of the introduction stuff you can see. All right, so there's the motivation and the basic what is High&Low. However, I think of it as really two separate projects. The first project is sort of building out the components, the world, the documents, the stuff I have in front of me that I'm going to show you, leaving aside any particular stories. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective was created in 1981, and 40 years later, people are still using the map and the directory to make new cases. And so I I think that's a wonderful thing. And I think that's a separate project here that I am very interested in doing with this. I want this material to be available for people to make cases with. And my interest is in creating a rich set of documents that are open source that anyone can download and print out or purchase pre-made, and then have other people make cases for it. So that's one project. And then the other project is writing specific stories and mysteries. And I've sketched out a campaign of 10 or 12 interweaving cases, 10 or so chapters, that's meant to be a sort of epic, really long form, like a novel of a single detective's career as you play that detective, and with character arcs and development. So I sort of have aspirations of doing something serious about the writing. Those are basically two projects, though. And we'll talk about both of them. We can spend as much time on either of them as you want. Okay, so now we're going to look at some documents here. Now, most of what I've been doing, and I've been working very hard on this for 6 months or so, you know that I'm a programmer. Most of what I've been doing is writing code to go from raw New York City GIS mapping data and other sources of data to producing the documents that I'm going to show you. I've been using QGIS, which is an open source mapping tool, and New York City puts out tons of open source data about the boundaries, the buildings, addresses, density, zoning, everything. And we're going to look at some of that. And one of the benefits of setting this in the 1930s, 1940s in New York City is there is huge amounts of photographs, history, books about the history. So it's a rich world to draw from. Okay, so we're going to now look at, let's see, what's my next slide? Okay, we're going to look at these documents here. So let's look at the maps first. Okay, so I've printed out 2 copies of the map atlas. This is your standard 8.5 by 11, and this is an A3 atlas. Let's just open this one out so you can see, just so you get an idea. There's our normal 8.5. All right, so before I open this up and start showing you, let me explain one of the challenges here. This is from Library of Congress. Much of the art you see on the covers of these are public domain art or borrowed art. I did not make this, and Rob is in the channel. It's very good at helping find some of these things, and there is a Discord channel where we talk about this stuff, and Rob and Nicola have been giving me a hard time about the maps, and we'll talk about it in a second. Okay, so but let me tell you part of the challenge with this. Manhattan, this is a picture of Manhattan, it's sort of a bad view, is like a 6-mile long, no, more than 6 miles. It's a long, thin stretch of land. You can't put it onto a single map, and you can't put it on a single map in any detail that would fit on your table. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective has a reasonable size map of London, and in this game, in High&Low, it's mostly, almost exclusively in Manhattan, 13 miles long. Okay. So Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective has a reasonable sized map. In fact, I have it here. If you're not familiar with Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, here's the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective map, made up of neighborhoods, all on one map. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I can barely read the street names with the naked eye, but with reading glasses I can. There are maybe 100 locations in each of the 5 neighborhoods, so 500 locations. And one of the sort of pieces of the puzzle that I think got solved here with High&Low is the idea of making the neighborhood the core piece of this game. And I'm going to explain why I think that's a solution that really pays dividends. So what you see here, what this atlas is, it's printed on pretty thick paper, is a collection of neighborhoods that make up Manhattan. So let's open it up and see. So here's an overview of Manhattan, broken into neighborhoods. There's the list of the neighborhoods. They're listed alphabetically by their 2-letter sort of index. There's Central Park in the center. In fact, I'm going to shift away from this big one. The small one is easier for me to put on the screen for you. Okay, let's do it like we normally do it. All right, so one of the reasons why it's so compelling to talk about Manhattan and this game in terms of neighborhoods is that the neighborhoods really do have different personalities. And we'll be changing some of these to try to give some of them their more flavorful names. But you've got Hell's Kitchen, one of the really scary history neighborhoods. And then you've got the Upper East Side, where the richest of the rich people live. So anyway, here's your overview of Manhattan. And then we have the maps for the different neighborhoods. Now, one of the reasons why I want to show you this atlas is that I've got, for each neighborhood, Michelle in the channel has been working on filling out this stuff. These are sort of neighborhood history and information for each neighborhood. This is Battery Park and the Financial District. And here's some photos, some information, some criminal activity, a bit of demographics, and points of interest. So each of the 33 neighborhoods has this for them. And the idea is to give you a little flavor of the neighborhood, a little idea of what kinds of stuff are going on in the neighborhood, to give you a little bit of atmosphere and flavor here. Now, we've got some of these written out, and some of this is just placeholder text. But I really want to try to give you the flavor of these places as being distinct places. And I'll tell you why, the other reason why I think this is so important. I'll just flip through this while I'm talking a little bit. There's Chinatown. There's Central Park. We can get a little bit of close up there. This is a drawing from 1878 or so, the original Olmsted plan for Central Park that they created 1857. There was a contest in New York City to design the park. And so a little bit about history, demographics leaning on the different ethnicities, points of interest. Okay. So, and you can see when you look at a neighborhood page, you get the neighborhood, which is in color. This is art. And then you see little outlines for where the neighboring neighborhoods are. So Upper West Side is over here. Upper East Side's over here. Harlem up here. So whenever you look at a map, you've got the map in color. And then you've got the neighboring neighborhoods grayed out. And here's your overview of Manhattan. I'm going to get to some questions in a second, but let me just point out one thing. One of the things that I've been struggling with that's a real challenge, I think, is that I'm making this big giant world. You'll see the size of the phone books. And we had an interesting experience playing some of these play-by-mail games. We played one set in LA, Noir, which is really a great setting. And we've played some LA Noir games that are very compelling. But then we played this one that was set in a small town. And somehow you can wrap your mind around it a little better. And there was something very compelling being in this small town. And I really worried about the idea of setting these cases in New York City and Manhattan, which is so huge, it's so dense, there's so many people, there's so many stores and locations, that would just feel completely impersonal. And I think one of the ways we're going to solve that is that each neighborhood is going to be like a small town. So I've actually gone to some trouble in the code that populates neighborhoods to make neighborhoods almost a little bit self-sufficient. In that, that's a little bit artificial, but you can almost guarantee let me back up. If you're playing Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, where's my documents to show you in case you guys, most of you on this channel are familiar, but here's our directory. And I'd say High&Low is probably 6 to 7 times the size of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective in number of locations and people. Okay, so here are your people. And then you've got a couple of yellow pages here. Okay, so in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, if we've got a victim that's been poisoned, we might go and say, okay, maybe they got their poison at a drugstore. Here's the chemists, okay? 8 chemists. So we might visit those 8 chemists. Now, if you're playing in Manhattan, High&Low, and we turn, there's our index, and we turn to let's see, drugstores. Well, there's 30 or so drugstores. You're not going to be visiting every drugstore. So that makes things a little bit more complicated, but I think we can flip that on its head. And what you'll notice here, if you look, is that essentially the game has populated a drugstore in every neighborhood. And then a couple extras. And I'm going to come back to the directory, but that's how most of the neighborhoods work. So each neighborhood is like a small town. There is going to be a couple restaurants and a couple bars, a drugstore, police precinct, which you can see is that little star there. So you could write, probably each case is going to be centered around one neighborhood or two. And if you wanted to treat it like a small town, that the people know each other and they're almost self-contained, you can. And I think probably one of the guidelines for writing cases in High&Low in this world is that a given person will go to businesses either in their neighborhood where they live or the neighborhood where they work. So if you got a murdered person by poison and you think maybe the poison was bought at a drugstore, you don't have to check 30 drugstores in the city. You basically would check the drugstore around the victim in the victim's neighborhood, or the drugstore wherever the poisoner lives or works. So it should cut down where you have to search even more than Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective does, but introduce an extra little puzzle of who would have bought the poison, they would have bought it near them, etc. Okay, so let's look at this for a second and talk about these maps for a second. You'll notice they're all have numbered blocks. These aren't buildings. These are tax lot blocks from Manhattan. Most of them have a single number. Occasionally, I've got a couple numbers in here. None of these maps are final. All of the street labels are they're all accurate streets. These are the accurate street names for these places. But in this neighborhood, you can read all the street names here. If you go to something like Battery Park, which is all old and convoluted, you occasionally get streets that are on top of each other that have to get hand tweaked and everything. They're color-coded for zoning. This is real zoning in Manhattan. I'm not sure that's the best way to color code things. Basically, what you've got is you've got green for parks, blues for pure residential, grays for mixed residential commercial, and yellows for pure commercial, and orange for manufacturing, basically. It's not that important. It's not that significant, and I think we may decide to mix it up. Now, as I was saying, these are tax lot blocks. So within this block, from 9th Avenue to 10th Avenue, for example, and 58th to 59th Street, there could be 30 buildings in here, which is what it's similar to Sherlock Holmes. Multiple buildings are packed in here. But I have to talk to you about how it differs from Sherlock Holmes a little bit. And there's some debate in the channel. Rob and Nickel are giving me a hard time about these numbered blocks, but we'll talk about that in a second. So let me just leaf through these to show you these a little bit. There are about 100 locations on each of the 33 neighborhoods, some give or take, and some of this will be changed up a little bit. And of course, that we've got some photos for each of them. Now, it's possible this could be in a separate book, but one of the benefits of the spiral binding is, I think, you put it on your table to not take up too much space when it's folded over, and then while you're leafing through. Okay, so what more did I want to show you besides flipping through? Maybe we need to talk about, okay, so there's bridges off Manhattan. Most of this set is set in Manhattan, but we can talk about other boroughs and other ways to access them. And okay, so I just want to show you all of this, and then we'll start talking about how to use the other directories and how it's a little bit different. But let me check in on the chat and answer any questions. Are you planning to integrate some of the history into the cases? Absolutely. You'll see. I am one of the things I love about Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is the feeling of time travel. The feeling of being sort of a time travel tourist is what I think of it. Occasionally you meet real people from history, and High&Low is meant to really lean into that. So lots of places you can go just for the flavor of it. Lots of real places in New York City that you could visit, museums, theaters, and just take in the scenery. Okay. Debbie says that sounds better than just running around 5 different businesses looking for the one you need. Delia says, I just noticed the neighborhood marked on the map on the lower right corner. Love the attention to detail. Thinking about adding that. What are some major historical events that may affect the cases? Well, my sketch for the campaign is to take it from 1929 to somewhere in the 50s and have this whole career arc of this player that you play as. You play as this one guy whose current name is Jack Deverell, and but all of that is up in the air. Dispamonite says, I'm curious how you handle the subway system for such a large area. Okay, well, let's talk about that for a second. If you look on the neighborhood maps, you will occasionally see a little subway symbol. That's the subway symbol. There's a police precinct. There's police precinct symbols, there's subway, and then there are buses, which I've only put on the far west side of the map. You can see there's a bus. So the subway is completely accurate to the subway in Manhattan as it existed around 3840. Here's the subway system in Manhattan. There's a couple of independent lines. The history is they were created by different companies before the city bought them all and merged them together. They tend to run north-south. There's a couple that leave Manhattan and go to Brooklyn, Queens, etc. So everywhere you see on this subway map, this is not a map I've made. This is just one we've cribbed from the time period. But every stop you see on a real subway line is in the game. It's on the map. You can find those stations. For example, here's a bunch of stations here, just as they are. 14th Street's quite a popular stop on the different avenues of the different lines. And so if you met a witness that said the guy turned right and then darted into the subway station, you could figure out what subway station that is. And again, this is one of these, we might need to make a list of the areas where there's going to be a little bit of, for game reasons, simplifications. And I think one of them is that we're going to describe the subway stations people as being like trained to be observant. So it's very likely if you can trace a suspect into a subway station that looked a little unusual, that you'll be able to talk to the subway attendant and get some observation like, yeah, I saw him. He went on the uptown train. Of course, now where he got off, that would be anyone's guess. But let me just show you. If you told me that someone got onto this train or probably darted in here, took a right and went down into the train station, let me just show you how I would go talk to that subway operator. It's in the East Village in Block 5. Okay, so I would get out my reverse directory. Now, this doesn't exist in Sherlock Holmes, and I'm sort of explaining this backwards because I probably should do this last, but let me just show you how the reverse directory works. We're in the East Village Block 5, so we would turn this to the East Village neighborhood. Remember, it's alphabetical. So there's EV for East Village. Here I am. And I said it was Block 5. So we would turn to Block 5, and we would see there is the subway station. It's a BMT line at 1st and 14th Street. And there's the lead number, which you might think of as like a phone number. But that's what you look up in your clue book to see if there's anything there. If you played Sherlock Holmes, the way it works is you pick a location on the map and you look that up. So if you picked location 5 Southwest, you would look up in the clue book 5 Southwest. High&Low does things a little differently. Every single person in business has their own unique random telephone number lead information. So all of these people in the East Village and businesses have their own unique random lead numbers. In Sherlock Holmes, you would say, let me just go to this place, and if there's anything on that block that's of any relevance to my case, you'll get it. You'll find out what it says, and often you stumble on things you shouldn't read. Here, you have to know exactly who you want to talk to. And then you look up their lead in your book. All right, I'm going to come back to this in a second, because this is the biggest document, but one of the big pieces of it. Now, most of the time, the map is just, except for these spatial puzzles, and just understanding geographics spatially, you wouldn't have to use the map much, just like in Sherlock Holmes. So let's take a look at the phone book, the yellow pages and the white pages. So right now, I've populated the place with 12,000 residents and about 5,000 businesses and places. 4,000, 5,000 businesses and places. So there's a lot. And I want to talk to you about it a little bit. How would the policeman know exactly? This is the complaint about realism. We've talked about, there's some debate in the Discord channel about my use of a reverse directory. It turns out that companies did make things called crisscross directories, which were very similar, that tried to be reverse directories. But I want to talk to you a little bit about the phone book for a second. So let's take a look at it. So these are what we would call the white pages. Again, another overview. They're all alphabetical. They list residents and businesses in the white pages. And the businesses are a different color. So let me just show you how this works under A's. We've got the name of the business or the person. We've got their actual street address. These are real buildings that people live in. I mean, this isn't the real person. We're not using real data for the people. For the businesses, it's a little bit of half and half. Okay, so you've got its name, its actual street address, which could be relevant for you. But then you've also got here what neighborhood they're in and what block on the neighborhood. So if you were curious about the A&P Market, you'd know it's on Hamilton Heights neighborhood. So you just pop out your directory, go to HH, and sorry, you'd go to HH block 25. Oops. So if you wanted to know where the A&P Market is, you'd get out your directory, you'd go to Hamilton Heights, block 25. You know the A&P is in this block, which you could then use your reverse directory if you wanted to, and look up HH 5, and you would see HH 25. You would, sorry, I'm in HE, Hamilton Heights 25. Okay, so let me just show you. If you wanted to know, hey, who lives above the A&P Market? Well, turns out that Jay Quesada actually lives not above it, but right next door at 3605 Broadway. So here are people that live right next door, right in that same block. In addition, if you wanted to say, hey, I wonder, this place got robbed, maybe someone across the street saw something. Let me look at block 20, Hamilton Heights. Maybe there's someone I could talk to down here. For example, the Hamilton Heights cab station is actually right across the street. Maybe they dropped off someone, or maybe someone eating dinner at Luigi's across the street saw something. Maybe you got a witness statement that said the guy came out of a restaurant before he robbed the supermarket. That might be a way you would try to figure out where you would follow up. Now, okay, so that's how you would interact with the reverse directory. But let me go back to the white pages for a second, because there's some stuff here that I'm pretty proud of that I want to talk about. All right, so here are our white pages as normal. Now I want to show you that occasionally, let's see if we can find one. So these are all procedurally generated. You'll see some people have their full names, some people just have initials. That's all a certain proportion. While it's generating these people, it's choosing that. Occasionally, someone will choose to be unlisted. It's pretty rare. Let's see if we can find one where they have decided they're not even going to have their address listed. I don't see any on that page. I think it's like XX. It's listed. There's one right there. Okay, so Roxanne Barjaval is in the directory. She's got a lead number. That presumably means you could call her up on the phone. Most of the time you'll be visiting these places just like Sherlock Holmes. You put in this, you look up this lead here, you would visit them. But here's someone that you're not going to be able to walk on. Maybe you'd be able to call them on the phone. And you would look them up just like you would in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. You'd get out your clue book for the case and you'd look up the numerically sorted things. You say, okay, 30033, this gives you the person you looked up the lead for to make sure you're reading the right thing, and then you'd read it. This would be per chapter, per case, you'd get your different book. Okay, so I want to show you something else. Okay, now, notice a couple of these people have apartments listed. So Barclay Glynis lives at 80 Wooster Street, apartment 1C. That's actually the address where I grew up, at 80 Wooster Street. I just stumbled upon this. And Barella lives at 171 Delancey in the penthouse. And Shavala lives in Midtown East in apartment 2C. So what I want to show you now is something I'm pretty proud of. So let's find Shavala. She's in ME, which I believe, well, let's go to my apartment. Let's go to my building. Okay, so Lower West Side, 27, Barclay Glennis. Okay, so we're going to go to, again, reverse directory. This is not important part of it. Oh boy, I forgot. Was it Lower West Side 27? Well, I can find it because I happen to know where that is on the map if we need to. So let's see if it was 27. Yes, okay. So now I want to show you what is at 27. It's an apartment building. A lot of people in Manhattan live in apartment buildings. So let's see what you see here in the reverse directory. You see the Wooster Street Apartments. It has its own lead number. That would presumably be for like a doorman if you were dealing with a rich, ritzy neighborhood, or maybe a maintenance man in a tenement. And then here are the people that live in those apartments and the apartment number. So if Barclay Glennis got murdered brutally last night, maybe you'd want to knock on the door of their next door neighbor and see if they heard anything. And we could find that on the map if we wanted to. So there you have it. So when the game is populating places, it's considering how big that building is. It's deciding to fill people in the building. You don't even have to go to the reverse directory for that. If we look in the yellow pages, we will see that apartment buildings have their own entries. So here are all the apartment buildings that are listed in the directory. So each of these places, here we have the listing of the doorman or the maintenance person, the building as a whole, and then where it is. And then each of these places are going to be guaranteed to be populated by people that you would find in the reverse directory. If you wanted to know who lived in the Eden apartments, you could look them up. You know where that building is, where it is on the map. You could find the people living in that apartment building if you wanted to. And I hope that will open up some interesting little puzzles. Anything else to show you about the yellow pages? I guess only that the code I've written is responsible for populating these places. These are all, or 95% of these are all fictional names that are generated by some templates, a little bit of ChatGPT to try to come up with candidate good names of places. This is another example of what I was saying before about how every neighborhood is sort of a small town. So there's a bank in every neighborhood. And one of the things we're going to tweak, though, is that each neighborhood will have a little bit of a specialty. So when you get to, in fact, I've done it for some of them. Like if we look at accountants, what you'll see is that the accountants, there's one in every neighborhood and then a bunch of extra in the financial district. And that's basically how all of these places should eventually be. There'll be one in every neighborhood, and then the theater district will have a bunch more theaters. The banking district, the financial district will have a bunch more financial stuff. So there'll be, each neighborhood should have its own little specialty feel, both because of businesses, but also because of ethnicities, which I haven't talked about. So if you look at the telephone book again, let's come back to the telephone book and the maps. Okay, so this is again one of these cases of a little bit of exaggeration license. Manhattan, New York City is a city of different ethnic enclaves and neighborhoods, and I've exaggerated that a bit. So I've used data about density of different neighborhoods. So certain neighborhoods are very poor, dense tenements. Those are packed with people in apartment buildings, and then you start to go uptown, it gets a little sparser. But each neighborhood is also ethnically exaggerated. So if we go to Chinatown, which has got some interesting history because right next door to Chinatown is Little Italy. So Chinatown is Chinese, and then Little Italy is Italian. And so if we... where's my Little Italy? Where's Little Italy? Oh, it's Li. Okay, so Little Italy is full of Italian immigrants. And right next door, there's Chinatown, showing you where Chinatown borders. Right next door is Chinatown. And if we look at the people that live in Chinatown, let's just do that with the reverse directory. Go to the 84 block in Chinatown, just to show you that, well, we can just look at Chinatown in the reverse directory. What you'll notice is they are largely Chinese Asian names. And that's how it goes. The code that's populating, I've got it generating names from Irish, German, Dutch, Jewish, Black American, Greek, whatever, and it's trying to populate the neighborhoods appropriately. So if we just go next door to Little Italy, we'll start to see some Italian names. Now, more than that, if we find a business, let's see if we can find one. Okay. Here's Palermo and Udinese Warehouse. Or maybe we can find a family-run business here. There's the family court, but let's see if we can't find a business. How about Longo, Puglisi, and Trentini Money Lending on Crosby Street? Okay, so I want you to notice something. Who do you see down below there on the same block? Prisco Longo. What you'll find is that when you come across a family-run business, the owner of that business is very likely to live nearby. And it uses a distribution, so there's a good chance they'll live like right upstairs, and then a lesser chance they'll live a block or two away, a very high chance that they'll live in the neighborhood. Again, this is my idea that neighborhoods are sort of these self-contained modular things. And then a more distant chance that they'll live far away, and then some small chance that they won't be in the directory at all. So I think that covers all of the interesting things about the normal telephone book and looking people up and who's where. I'll just show you a quick example of, there are also places that are off the maps, off Manhattan. And so here's just an example of one of the problems with the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective system is that all of the leads are their neighborhood address. And so if you want to have a place that doesn't exist on the map of London, there's no place for it to be in the clue book. And so you have to come up with very awkward ways of doing it that makes it very easy to accidentally leak information. Here, every lead is just a random number, so it's very easy for me to generate leads for people that you have contacts for that are outside New York City, little islands like Rikers Island, a jail, and then these are districts in these other boroughs. So I think if we may do some Brooklyn expansion at some point and have a whole full map of Brooklyn, but right now almost everything happens in Manhattan. But some of your puzzles are going to be worried about people leaving your area, your jurisdiction. There's all different maps. If you look at the maps of neighborhoods, you'll see there's a whole bunch of bridges and subways off Manhattan. And so you might worry that your suspect is fleeing. You might stop by the bridge office, see if they've noticed someone. And then if you knew exactly where they lived in Brooklyn, you might say, oh, they live in Bushwick. Let me go talk to the local precinct liaison with the local PD in Bushwick, see if they can't roust this guy up. So these would be ways that you might write cases that touched in different areas off the outside of Manhattan. And we have some maps for other boroughs that we might want to reuse. Okay, so that's just to show you that. All right, so we've looked at that. We didn't really look much at the yellow pages, but I don't think it's that important. I guess the only thing to show you, I mean, we could just glance. Well, here's the list of categories. And you'll notice that the police departments have a precinct in every neighborhood. You'll notice some people in the white pages have their own business as under their own name. There's some interesting thing about that that seems realistic. And then here we have the list of buses. The buses run crosstown. So if you thought someone got on a bus on 96th Street, you could talk to the bus driver that runs these routes. So the buses are simpler. They're just running crosstown back and forth on one street. So if you thought your guy took a certain bus on a certain street, you could talk to the driver who runs that route. Taxi cabs are going to be the same thing about like neighborhood based. In Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, there's an ally that runs the cabs, and we almost always inevitably go to that ally because why not? They've got great stuff. Here, that's going to be different. Here, if you want to track someone down who has a cab, you've got two options. You're gonna have to talk to the cab people from the place where the guy got on. So each neighborhood has its own cab station and company, which are listed here. And you're going to have to figure out, I guess it's under taxi cab. You're going to have to talk to that cab station to see if they drop someone off or pick someone up. So you're going to have a little more information to narrow down the likely cab person you need to talk to. So there's your subway stations, lots of them. Again, you're going to have to narrow things down in high and low before you can just, instead of just randomly taking a shot at the dark. Someone's asking about Yellow Pages ads. So I did write code to pull in and integrate ads. I just put a couple samples from real hotels. And some of these, there's a lot of hotels, mainly because we've got a list of real hotels. So these are real hotels that were at their real places. This is the McAlpin, which was a real hotel around the 30s, and it's where it should be, and it's in the directory. So one of the things that needs to be done is a lot more real data has to get pulled in, and we need some little help extracting these real ads, and then hopefully they will fill up throughout this whole thing. Hopefully maybe like 1 or 2 yellow page pictures for each page, just to add a little bit of flavor. And we need more real places, like any famous place, restaurant, theater, monument. We would like to get it really in here at its real address. Okay. That's the yellow pages. Again, these are reasonable places, but a lot more work has to get done to refine these, to clean them up, to decide how many, should there be more of these, less of these, what neighborhoods should there be more of them in, and get real data. Okay, so you've seen the reverse directory, yellow pages, white pages. You've seen the map. I didn't show you the census. This is my internal document to help me keep track of and troubleshoot the ethnicity stuff. So we've got Black American originating names, and Chinese names. So this is just listing the people of these different ethnicities so I can check where they are. Are they in the place where they should be? And of course, all of those maps, I should say, are being generated on the fly from data. So I can plot these people, I can say, show me all the restaurants on the map. It's all open source data, and we can carve up the neighborhoods differently. Those aren't hand-drawn maps. Those are all generated programmatically, which is one of the, I guess this is as good a time as any to show Robin and Tina have been working on different ideas for maps. I would absolutely like to have a human hand go and work up those maps, make them feel more hand-drawn, put places of interest. But Rob worked up a little mock-up of an alternate style based on some of the styles that were seen in maps at the time. I love the extra hand stuff and the naming of some key places. Rob and Nicola are fighting me on numbered blocks. They want to use a numbered grid system, but we'll come back to this. But eventually, those maps have to have a hand touch, an artist touch, to make them feel more distinctive and unique. All right, boy, I've went longer than I thought on this. We may have to split this into a couple streams. Okay, neighborhood focus, I talked about that. I talked about apartments, the owners nearby, the subway station, the different kinds of listings, etc. I did all that. I talked about how you would look up someone, what issues that solved. Okay, so far so good. Reverse directory, I talked about how that is something that you don't see in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Figure out what's near a location, did they live in the same building, except like that. And then I mentioned the debate, the people that Rob and Nicola are giving me a hard time about it. And the fact that everyone has in Sherlock Holmes, it's interesting because in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, occasionally you'll get some interesting clue that's like, this person lived at 5 Sidmouth Street or 5 Southwest. And then you'll look at the 5 neighborhoods and find where the 5 is, which of the 5 is at this address, but it's a very artificial address. Here we're dealing with all real addresses in New York City, so you could have interesting puzzles where someone told you they were on Broadway or 51st Street, or they live near a restaurant, and you could, because you've got the reverse directory, and because addresses are real and the street addresses are real, you've got a real shot of having little puzzles that require you to do some spatial understanding, spatial reasoning with the maps and stuff. Okay, so now I'm getting into more mechanical stuff. Let me check in with the chat and see what we want to do here. Would a suspect be able to purposely go to places outside their neighborhood to hide their actions? Making Larry says, how much did New York detectives move about? I mean, that's one of these questions that I think there's certain areas that I'm hewing very closely to the realism. I mean, it's one of the big challenges, how much realism? I think in general, you're a detective, you're going to be focused on a specific neighborhood, but you'll follow that where it takes you if people travel around. Remember, the whole place is only 13 miles. You could walk the whole Manhattan in a day. And then, but the way I see it, probably a given case is going to focus on 1 or 2 neighborhoods. And look, you're writing a case, you can make it any way you want. If you're dealing with some mastermind Moriarty in Manhattan, maybe he's not going to go to the drugstore in his neighborhood to throw you off the trail. But I think in general, one of the things I talk about in the rule book, which we can look at, is some suggestions for how people should think about searching. And I do think it's important that you don't want the player to have to look at 30 drugstores. That's not right. There should never be a case that requires you to visit all 30 drugstores to find someone. That has to be understood by case writers as an unfair case. There has to be some logic, some way to winnow things down till you get to a handful of possibilities. And then you can make the person go to those handful. Okay, I think we've got a choice here. We could stop here and have another live stream in a week. We could run through a couple more things. We could stop and chat. Let me just briefly skim you through the other bound documents. This is more writing on rulebook and story. I just want to show you what exists. I've shown you the maps and the directories. Let me just show you what exists in draft form currently. Let me zoom out so I can do both pages. Okay, so this is a beautiful piece of art I found on the web by Rodrigo something. A beautiful piece of art. Okay, so rule book, just a sketch of a rule book. This is talking about using the directory, visiting leads. This is what I was just talking about, how you'll never be told to, thinking about reasonable versus unreasonable directory searches, exactly what we're talking. And there's some interesting new mechanics I haven't talked about yet. End of day briefings, which I am going to talk about. Instinct wagers, that's something that we've been debating a little bit back and forth about. End of campaign, end of chapter, thinking about winning and losing. Just a little synopsis that we talked about before. This would be sort of like if you were to explain this game to someone. Here's a little essay about where the realism is and where liberties have been taken, and then some real warnings about some of the terms and language being not appropriate to modern ears, not sounding right. And then, as I talked about, I'm interested in making this a system that people can use. So I've been often on writing a couple guides for using this to make cases. And it's sort of shocking that Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective has all these fan cases, but no real good guide to how you write them. And people like Martinez, who's in the channel, has written amazing cases. They're sort of savants. They just know how to do it from playing these cases. And Dave Neal and his bakers, some people are really good at this. And I think it'd be nice to sort of try to codify some of that and talk about how to make a case and how to make a good case. So, and especially since High&Low uses some different rules and systems, I'm trying to do this along the way. Here's a discussion of how you should manage your difficulty level because it's a little different. And then a couple of pages on how it differs from Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, because that's the closest cousin. This document is in the zip file that I made a link to on this video if you want to go and study this in detail. And then this is an older version of the similar thing, more on story. Some of these are just thoughts that need more organization. Okay, everything from here on is story for a case, actually building the first chapter. So I've told you I've outlined a campaign of 10 chapters, and then I've tried to write the first chapter and write some text and story. So this is in the zip file if you want to read it. I'm going to just show you what it is. Now, one of the issues we're going to have to solve is that this is written more like a novel. And it's much longer than the text you would read in Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. And we're going to have to figure out, does it get broken up? Do we just go with this kind of thing? So this is a little prologue. Debbie has been helping me do editing, has been doing a great job. And we're talking about, does this belong in the rule book, whatever. This is where we meet our guy. And he runs into, well, I don't know if I want to read. I don't want to ruin it. I was thinking of reading it to you so you could get a flavor for what I'm after, what I'm thinking, to see if it appeals to you. But maybe we don't have time for that. And then this is your first case, possible suicide in financial district. This is our guy gets his call to adventure. Now, I just want to notice this is happening at 160 Pearl Street. This is a photo of 160 Pearl Street. New York City has this public domain set of photos that you can map to locations. And so I've tried to use that where I can. And so we get a little bit of our call to adventure here. Then he travels, meets with his boss. Here he is on scene at 11 Broadway at Bowling Green building. That is the Bowling Green building. A little bit of discussion of history here, integrated into the narrative, into the dialogues. If you're interested in the writing, whether you think my writing is going to do it for you, you could check this out and see if you like it. If you don't, here's again continuing. This is all sort of part of the intro to the first case, where he's sort of walking around, talking to people, sort of setting the scenes. Another little intermission where we circle back to our prologue a little bit. And then all of that is not spoiler. You can read all of that. Some of it will change, but if you read chapter 1A, 1B, prologues, all of that is not going to spoil anything. It's just the intro, no stuff. But then end of day briefings, which I don't think I included in the zip file, but I've got written out here to show certain people what I have in mind for these special mechanics and end of day stuff. One of the things that those of you who want to get involved in this, which I haven't gotten to yet, but I'm going to ask for people to collaborate and volunteer, is to decide whether you want to be in the group that gets all the spoilers or the group that doesn't get any spoilers to play it. And there are lots of spoilers in this whole campaign arc. But this stuff you don't want to look at, because this is showing how the case ends and your final decisions, and how you've got a couple different epilogues depending on what you choose to do and how things turn out, etc. Okay, so there you have it. I mean, the story part and the cases have a lot more work to be done on them, but there's enough there for you to get a flavor. Logan says, do you have an overall visual style in mind? Photographs and drawings, Art Deco, pen and ink? Well, that's a great question. I'm thinking that whatever art, if we can get any artists that are interested in this, we can sprinkle art throughout. There's so many documents, there's so many places for little snippets of art. I don't think it's so critical that they all be consistent. And different people may be writing cases independently from my campaign and arc, and they would love to have art, whatever. So I think as much art as any reasonable artist can produce in this world, there's going to need to be art for the characters, whatever. We can use as much as we can. We are going for a 1930s, 1940s vibe, so as much as it can be set in that time, the better. Okay, so I'm not going to read any of that. I was thinking I might read it, spend 10 minutes reading it so you get a flavor for it, but you can read it if you want. So I haven't talked about any of the new mechanics, which is kind of important, but I don't know. Should we chat? It's hard to know. I didn't plan to go so long. Will there be assistance? This is all first person present tense. One of the things I experimented with. All right, I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to read a little bit of the story. I'm going to read a little bit of the prologue here. Okay. Let's see if I can put it on the screen so I can read it, just as if we're playing. Now, you might not like this, and in which case, you could still use this to make your own cases. Make your own detective in your own world. Okay, here we go. This is your little prologue. It's 8 a.m. I'm sitting in the middle of the lead car of the BMTR, rumbling and bouncing like a Coney Island roller coaster from Brooklyn into Manhattan. My head leaned back against the wall and my hat down over my eyes as the subway rocks me to sleep. Almost as soon as we pull out of the Furman Street station, I hear her. She's way down at the opposite end of the car from me, but her voice is a siren's song, hard to ignore. She's apologizing for bumping into someone as she makes her way down the aisle. I sit up and push my hat back, glancing down the car to see what she looked like. She's a brunette, tall and a little chubby, with a large flowery dress that stops just below her knees and a stack of variously sized white cartons in her arms. She's got a red ribbon in her hair, and her large chest nearly spills over the elastic top of the dress, held up by two thin red straps over her bare shoulders. Cute. I go back to the book on my lap. "Holmes," said I, as I stood one morning in our bow window looking down the street, "here is a madman coming along. It seems rather sad that his relatives should allow him to come out alone." Chubby Flower Dress is still making her way down the car towards me, looking for a wide seat with room for her packages, presumably. The train jumps, and I just see her, out of the corner of my eye, stumble and fall against an old man a few yards down the train on a bench opposite mine. I can smell her perfume now, strong and flowery to match her outfit. She bends down to pick up the packages that have fallen onto the floor, her knee-length dress just barely covering her large flowery behind, and the old man moves to help her. Her soft, warm voice apologizes profusely for being so clumsy, though she's probably made his week. He's wearing a tan fur-collared overcoat, and his mustache is precisely cared for. There's an expensive-looking gold wristwatch on his left wrist. The R train into Lower Manhattan is a great equalizer, used by rich and poor alike. Our car is filled with steelworkers, street sweepers, and stock market analysts. But I'd give odds this guy here is the richest guy on the train, so now I'm paying attention. What's more, it's November. Where's her coat? I close the book on my finger, then lean back and adjust my hat so I can get a good view of the rest of the car. On one side of the old man, the side farther from me, is a guy who looks like a stockbroker. His head is down, trying to look like he's reading his newspaper, except that his eyes are all over Chubby Flowers. Nothing strange about that. The two women next to him are looking at each other, sharing a moment of righteous disapproval. I quickly scan the rest of the subway car. Everyone's watching the scene unfold, except that the young guy on the other side of Gold Watch, face buried in his paper, doesn't seem to be stealing glances at the brunette. Instead, his eyes appear fixed, if anything, and slightly angled towards the old man. Now I turn right to scan the rest of the car. Nothing unusual at first, but then as I'm turning back to the set piece unfolding to my left, I lock eyes for a fraction of a second with the young guy directly opposite me. He's dressed in a well-worn brown dress pants and a dusty jacket. Looks a little like a cowboy who's lost his horse. He's back to staring at the floor now, but it's too late. If he had kept my gaze for another half second, I would have just chalked it up to one of those knowing glances that New Yorkers sometimes share, as if to say, yeah, only in New York. But this was different, like he was sizing me up. Chubby Flowers and the old man have finished collecting her stack of boxes, and she sat down on his right with the cartons piled on her lap, her dress caught under them so that her knees are showing. She's smiling widely with her candy apple lipstick and telling Gold Watch about her wedding shop in Midtown. Newspaper guy to the old man's left has got his newspaper folded now, and he's tapping it against his knee. Cowboy opposite me takes a quick glance down the car towards the scene and then back again to the floor. Again, his glance is too brief. It's not natural. He's new at this. We're approaching Battery Park now, and Gold Watch is saying his goodbyes to Chubby Flowers. Seems for a moment like he's considering staying to follow her on her day's errands. But he's got money to make. Now she's telling him how happy she was to have met him, inviting him to visit her at her wedding store if he ever finds the time. You can bet the first thing he'll do when he gets into his office is start planning a wedding. If he's lucky, he'll get in a few hours of daydreaming before he realizes he's lost his watch. And what a coincidence. Looks like Battery Park also happens to be the last stop for Newspaper Guy and the Cowboy. They're checking out the exits. This isn't my beat, and I'm not on the clock. And anyway, this is kind of a lion and antelope in the Serengeti situation. On the other hand, this kid across from me, well, he's kind of made it my business. I pull myself upright and lean forward to him so we can share a word. He takes a beat, but then understands and leans in to meet me. Just the three of you, I ask. He glances to his right for a millisecond, and the guy next to him sighs in exasperation and leans in too. He's a middle-aged gentleman who I hadn't taken notice of before, with an angular face, steel gray eyes, and a thick salt and pepper beard. Kind of looks like a professor. 4, says the professor. I smile and turn to him, obviously the ringleader of this little troop. Cowboy sits back and contemplates his lost horse. Chubby Flowers is shaking the rich guy's hands vigorously now, and with both of her hands all over his. I'm on the job, I say to the professor, somewhat apologetically. The professor nods in resignation, then coughs loudly in a kind of ostentatious way. Chubby Flowers and newspaper guy both take a quick glance over to us. Then newspaper guy sits back and opens up his paper, taking his first real look at the day's headlines. Chubby Flowers deflates visibly and melts into her seat, pulling her dress down over her knees, letting her shoulders drop. Gold Watch can tell something's gone wrong, but doesn't know what. She's lost interest in him, and he reluctantly heads out the door, taking one last forlorn look backward as he steps off the platform. He'll probably spend the day worrying about her. Maybe he'll even make a trip down to her non-existent wedding store to ask her if everything's all right. The train pulls off, and I can see him standing there, staring into the departing train car. Next stop, Chubby Flowers comes over to join the two young men, and they queue up to leave. She gives me a long, hard look, crossed between an invitation and a gypsy's curse. When the subway pulls into Rector Street Station, they head out, with the professor at the rear. He turns and locks his gray eyes on me and smiles wryly, as if to say, only in New York, eh? As the train pulls away, I lean my head back against the wall again and tip my hat back over my eyes. Kind of a shame, really. I'd have liked to see the rest of them do their thing. Okay, so there's my little prologue to give you a little bit of flavor into Jack's personality. That's who you are. You're Jack on his way into work. You may meet those people again. They may be recurring characters. We'll see. Thank you for indulging me. That'll either work for you or it won't. If it doesn't, then probably you won't want to play my stories, but maybe you'll make your own stories, your own detectives, or use my detective. I have no ownership in any of this, really. I'm happy to have collaborators work on any part of it. Let's check in with the chat. Rob says, if there's no Dear Home stream, you might as well go through everything you planned for the stream. Debbie says, I think it would be better to formalize the mechanics a bit more first. Scoring system needs a lot of work. How much of the images currently in use will need to be replaced for the final version? That's a great question. All of the cover images that aren't public domain will be. The neighborhood photos, some of those will have to be replaced. For the most part, I'm trying to use public domain images, but some of them are just placeholders and will have to be replaced for sure. And then obviously it would be nice to have art in the rule books and all of the documents. Okay. So I think Rob might be right. If we're not going to do the Dear Holmes, let me just go on. You can skim through this and watch this later. So let me talk a little bit. Martinez says, as a possible contribution, I'm excited about trying to write a fan case in the world of High&Low as soon as I can. Well, I mean, we would be very lucky if Martinez did decide to write a case, because it would be wonderful. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the new ideas and mechanics. I mean, I want to use this as a sort of, as I said, a sort of laboratory to test theories and try things. This isn't really a commercial project. I don't think it's ever going to be financially feasible to produce this. I'm not interested in selling it. I don't care about any of that. It's more of a art project is how I think of it. And if it can be used by people to make games that I can play, because I can't play the games I write, but if other people write cases that I can play and play on the channel, nothing would thrill me more. Okay, so let's talk about some of the key new ideas here that I feel strongly about, that differ from Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, that I think are important. And then we'll get to some more questions. All right, where is my little guide? Okay. Okay, so a key one is addressing time. And this isn't a totally novel idea. It's been tried in some of the old long giant expansions for Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, like Adventures by Gaslight, whatever, and Razorhurst tried it a little bit. But I want to really lean into this idea of events happening between days. I think it was John Keene's Razorhurst that did this the best, that really, there's a bunch of stuff in Razorhurst that really hit home with me that I think is worth checking out. Since it's free, you can download, you can try it. But Sherlock Holmes normally takes place in a sort of where time doesn't pass. That is, you can go to as many leads as you want. Most cases in Sherlock Holmes only happen for one day. And then some of the cases that have tried to do some time, try to make time pass when every lead you go to, and if you go to 10 leads, then that's all you have for the day. I don't want any of that. But I love the idea of saying that in a very simple, boiled down fashion, every case, every scenario, every chapter is going to get broken into multiple days. That's how, as a writer, as a case designer, you should be thinking. You should be thinking, this is the case of the missing, widow, and it takes place over 3 days. Within each day, the player can do whatever they want, as many leads as they want. They don't have to keep track of time. The day is not going to end on its own prematurely after 10 leads. Time stands still during the day. Go to as many leads as you want. When you're ready to end the day, and when you think you've seen everything you want to see, and this is a big difference between the way some people play Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective and the way my group wants to play completionist. We want to see everything. We don't want to finish the game without having seen anything important. Some people like these strict time limits. I don't want any, there's no strict time limits in High&Low. You spend the day doing whatever you want. There's no time passing. It's all sort of static within the day. But the case is going to take place over 3 days, 3 virtual days. And events will happen between those days. So you could imagine that you've got your first murder victim on day 1. You can investigate that as much as you want. When you wake up the next day, you might find another murder victim. You might find the coroner's report has come in. It's structured in multiple days with things happening while you're sleeping between the days. Some things you might anticipate, some things you won't anticipate. But that's the structure. Time stands still until days. There's another big piece of that formula, which is trying to solve the difficulty issue. So I'm hoping that will give the game a sense of dynamic action, threat, danger, because there are events, they're happening overnight. So if you failed to do something during the day that's important, you might pay that price in the morning. But there is one key piece of the way that mechanic works. And before I describe that, I have to explain what I think a core problem with setting difficulty levels in these games are. If you think of the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective style game, there are 2 key sort of deductive challenges. One is, if you saw everything, if you read every clue, if you read through the entire clue book, if you saw every document, could you understand what happened? The second part of the best of these cases is figuring out where to go to get information. That's frequently a big part in the best of these cases and in the more difficult of these cases. Like, they were poisoned. You can't find the poisoner. Were you smart enough to realize that they worked at the university? And so maybe they went to the chemistry lab, and did you go there and talk to the person who gave you the information that, yes, they were seen there? And one of the huge problems with calibrating difficulty of these games is, as a case writer, as a designer, you've got a problem. You'd like to place these difficult, hard to find, clever clues, but someone could play for 3 hours if it just hasn't occurred to them, or they just didn't quite get on the right wavelength, they will have missed this key piece of evidence. So what inevitably happens? What inevitably happens is the writers can't make a case hang on this one key piece of evidence. They have to make redundant ways to get enough information that even if you missed thinking this and you didn't think of that, you still are probably going to see most of the information to solve it. Or if it's a hard case, you won't. You'll get to the end and you'll say, oh, I had no idea this happened. It never occurred to us that we would be able to find the person's brother. Or you'll get there and you'll be like, we tried for 2 hours trying to think of a way to figure out where this guy went to lunch, and we never could figure it out because you missed some detail. Makes it very hard to calibrate these games' difficulty, and it makes authors tend to have to make them easier so that people don't have these bad experiences. Okay, so I propose a solution to that. And it's part of my solution to that and to solving the scoring system of Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which I find bizarre. Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective basically says the faster you solve it, the fewer leads you look at, and you are able to answer the questions, the better your score, which makes no sense to me. This should be an experience you should savor. Okay, so here's how it works in High and Low. Cases split into days. Let's say a 3-day case, and then a final day when you're going to be asked to come in and make recommendations and provide evidence. You play the first day, you can go anywhere you want. You spend as much time as you want. Time doesn't pass. When you're ready to end the day, when you said, I've seen everything I can see, I've followed up all the leads I can figure out to follow up, you go and you say, I'm ready to end the day. At that point, you have a little dialogue with your boss, the police chief, whatever. And you basically walk through a dialogue that's a little bit like an interactive hint system. So basically, you'll go in, you'll say, I'm ready to end the day, and he'll say, you did talk to the victim's wife, right? And if you say yes, then you move on to the next question. He's like, okay, good. And you went and got the autopsy report. If at some point down this little tree, this little checklist, you missed this critical clue, then you go back out and you get a demerit. So what it is it's basically like a forced hint system that bottlenecks you from missing key pieces of evidence. Now, it may not bottleneck you till the final day, so there might have been a lead you could have found on day one, and maybe that witness is going to get killed if you don't find them on day one, but you can still get to their house and get enough information. But if you try to end the case having missed a key critical piece clue that the author needs you to see to have a chance at solving it, your boss is going to remind you, push you, nudge you to check that out. And you'll get a penalty. So none of the penalty is for time. In fact, you're rewarded for taking your time and being comprehensive. But you are going to get punished if you didn't figure out to do something. You're going to get punished in 2 ways. You're going to get punished a little demerit, but you're also going to get punished because it's going to have been, you are going to have missed figuring that out on your own. And to me, that's exactly how punishment and score should work in a narrative game. You're narratively punished because a guy is saying, hey, you kind of messed up. You didn't even do the most rudimentary thing of talking to the victim's spouse. That was ridiculous, and you get a little reputational damage. But the game ensures that by the time you get to the end of this, you will have seen, it doesn't guarantee you'll see everything, but it gives the author control to know, okay, they're going to have seen these things. I can guarantee they are not going to get to the end of the game without having seen these. And now I can make it a real challenge even after they've seen these. So the difficulty can get ramped up such that the author knows that they've seen all the critical things. It also means that a new player could play it and sort of go for the ride. Almost like, I don't know where else to go. I'm just going to go to the boss and say I'm going to ready to end the day. And they can know that the boss is going to send them back out with a complaint and a demerit, but send them back out. So if they get stuck, sometimes when we play Sherlock Holmes, we get stuck. We think there's probably a way to find this, and you have to spend 2 hours. You don't want to spend more hours, and maybe you're wrong. Maybe you found everything, but you're afraid to move on to the final answer because if you miss this, you won't even be able to answer that. You don't have to worry about that in High and Low. You're going to get a penalty if you didn't find it yourself, but he's going to make sure, the game is going to make sure that you see those things. And I think that solves those whole host of problems all in one. Debbie says, I really like the overall idea of a 3-day structure, allows for story progression, avoiding frustrations of a time system. Yeah. And acts and changing acts and some real threat. And okay, so there are other things that might happen at the end of the day. There's a wager system that lets you bet on your instincts about who you don't trust, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. There's some debate about whether it's overly complicated or not. It's not important. The other thing, there's 2 other things that are part of High and Low. One of them are moral, psychological, romantic choices with narrative rewards. So it seems to me that if these games are about reading and narrative and enjoying being in the story. And it surprises me then that the people who write these games are focused on sort of score, your best score for solving it quickly. It seems to me that a narrative game whose whole value and enjoyment is narrative should have narrative rewards. So in High and Low, you're going to be making choices, and they're going to be very morally ambiguous. There are some choices in Chapter 1 I can't show you because it's spoiler, but you could imagine... Well, let me back up a little bit. In Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, when you get to the end of the case, you answer questions, and then Holmes explains the solution to you. That's not how it works in High and Low. In High and Low, you get to the end of the case, and you make a recommendation, like a charging recommendation. Like, I think it was John Doe killed his wife. And then you read an epilogue of what happens in the days and weeks and months that follow the conclusion of that case. Now, if you recommend that John Doe gets arrested for the murder of his wife, you may find in the epilogue that you read about the trial, and that's the one place you're going to sort of be reading about yourself from the third party. You may find out that it turned out he was innocent and you tried to arrest the wrong guy and he got set free and you became, you got bad reputation from it, etc. Or he could get convicted and proclaim his innocence. And you might have second thoughts after reading the trial transcript. Did you just recommend the wrong guy? Maybe that's going to come back to get you in a future case in the campaign. But there's no omniscient solution. Some people, probably a good chunk of them, will confess, or it'll get wrapped up in a way that you'll know you were right. But you're going to be reading epilogues based on your things. Maybe you catch the wife that killed her husband, you figure it out, but he was a horrible husband. Maybe you have a choice. Maybe you don't turn her in. Or maybe you give the stolen money to the orphan's home. You will have moral choices that have not scoring consequences. There will be no right or wrong answers, but narrative consequences. narrative consequences in terms of epilogue. It's not going to be a huge branching, millions of different paths. But there'll be choices that affect sort of your style of play and your morality. And I'm hoping, my idea is, by the time you finish the campaign, that the game will be able to give you like a little bit of a report that describes your style, so that if two people play it, you could compare and say, oh yeah, I did all these choices. I was like the bringing justice to everyone. I punished everyone. And someone else might say, I was trying to be kind, and etc. I almost forgot that there's one other piece that's related to the difficulty issue. In Sherlock Holmes, one of the things that occasionally happens in these kinds of games is we'll get a quarter of the way through, halfway through, and we'll have figured it out. Okay, we got it. The daughter did it to get revenge on the stepmother, etc. At that point, you're sort of in a tricky position, because you're like, well, we kind of figured it out. Now we're just sort of regurgitating stuff, confirming stuff we already knew. Should we just jump to the answer and give our answer and have figured it out early, or should we bother keeping playing? One of the things that makes High&Low significantly different is that your goal is not just to understand the mystery. Your goal is to make recommendations and present evidence. So just because you figured out that the daughter has killed the stepmother doesn't mean you can stop playing and jump to the solution, because you have not found the evidence, or you have not found enough evidence. Now, you're going to have to decide what's enough evidence. Maybe you find some and you think, is this ambiguous? Is this good enough? So those are the kinds of things you're going to be doing in High&Low. It's not just about understanding what happened, but given that you now understand what happened, and the reward for figuring out early what happened is now you can say, aha, since we have early figured out that the daughter probably killed the stepmother, now that we've figured that out, does that give us insight into where to look for proof that this happened? And I hope that that will be one of the delicious parts about it, that the earlier you can figure out stuff, even just a gut instinct, that will inform your searching for evidence. And so that instead of being deflated that you figured it out early, you can be excited that you figured it out early, because now you're going to be able to get the evidence before it disappears, etc. Okay. I think we're almost done here with my prepared stuff. I've talked about the player task. These are the key ideas. Other mechanical ideas. All right, so there's a whole bunch of other ideas that I've been flirting with. Some of these for sure are going to take place. One of the things I definitely want to do is borrow from all of these cold case games and Vienna Connection as well. In Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, occasionally you'll find like a handwriting note, and it's in the clues. It's just in the clues where you could accidentally see it, and it's small, it's a little thing. In High&Low, there'll be an evidence envelope, numbered evidence envelope with photographs, real-looking documents, full stuff you would find in a cold case game. So you'll be traveling to a lead, like you get the coroner's report, or you stumble on a note. It'll say, go get sheet 55. You'll go get that. It'll be a full 8.5 by 11 photocopy of a real looking document. So we definitely need official looking documents as evidence, so that you get it may be hard to explain to people who've only played Sherlock Holmes, but if you play these cold case games, you know there's a real thrill at getting a dense document, like a timeline list or someone's shopping list, whatever, and being able to look at that and really study and have it be dense, packed with information. So lots of real documents in this game that get brought out as you're playing the game. Maybe they come out during the events at the new days, or you have to go to a place, discover. Instead of reading a description of a document you find, you'll go to the envelope and pull it out. I don't care about I'm not into the feely stuff. It doesn't have to be a real folded envelope that's crumpled up. It won't be that, but it'll just be sheet 55 will be a photocopy of the scene of the crime, or a blueprint, or a report document, autopsy report. Should look like a real document. Okay, anything else here? Use of radio broadcasts I've written about in some of my documents. That still needs to be worked on a little bit. I would like to, since I'm writing all this code for people, I can produce another document that's like criminal histories of people, of 1,000 or so people that you might confront. I do have a way to programmatically generate fingerprints. We just have to figure out, there are a couple of games that use fingerprints, Mugbook and Gumshoe. I think there has to be a more interesting way to do it before I'm willing to go through all the trouble for it. I have another fairly clever idea that I think is really quite exciting about an evidence matrix. I'm not sure, since I'm dumping all this information, I'm gonna give it to you. So what the idea I had, whether this will make its way in or not, I don't know. But one of the ideas I had is that you might at some point get access to a couple of forensic examination tools. And basically it would be like a grid. Like this would be a fingerprint analysis. You could use the same grid, but you might get access to a couple things you could do. You could do fingerprinting, you might do blood analysis, whatever. And it's this grid. And then if you ever came across, for example, a scene of a crime, you could say, okay, I want you to fingerprint, grid B5, B6, fingerprint A4. I see a cigarette butt here, so I want this fingerprint. So you would pick the grid locations. So you can't do everything, right? You'd have a limit, and a couple per day you could do. And the way you would do it is each place on the grid would have a lead ID number. I've got tens of thousands of spare ID. So there'd be a separate chart that said that, 10-5 was lead number 4642. So then you would look that up. And you'd have to wait a day to get that back. So anyway, that's my evidence matrix idea. I think it's a clever way of sort of doing a low tech thing that you would do on an app very easily. And I am very interested in these play-by-mail delayed responses. So anything that could force a delay, and I'm interested in possibly using the same building blocks. If someone was interested in doing a play-by-mail game, I think that would be a great idea. Let me catch up in the chat. I think we're almost done here. Rob says, the replacement of newspapers with radio broadcasts is a major difference. You should discuss this more. Okay, well, people are complaining that they want newspapers. I'm not sure about this yet. But my inclination is to try to use the idea of radio broadcasts that you might catch snippets of in different places, rather than a newspaper that's an overload of information. But I'm not dead set against having newspapers. I'm just not sure it's the best way to do it. There's some interesting, great parts about it, some not. But I think the idea of hiding information in radio broadcasts is appealing to me in terms of having snippets of it that you would encounter throughout the case, rather than one big block of newspaper thrown at you. Logan says, is there a film you can think of with a visual style? I mean, Naked City series, TV shows are great. Any of the classic film noirs. Maybe we can start making a little catalog of movies to read, to watch, to get in the vibe. Tenzret said, we just finished Vienna Connection, had a huge discussion about issues with these kinds of games. Vienna Connection is one of those games that the more I look back on it, the more fondly I feel about it. But that folder of documents that you were instructed to take out of it was very sad. There's something very satisfying about any of these legacy games that have you pull these surprise documents out. So I do want that. Martinez says, from an author perspective, I'm not keen on newspapers either. Some of the epilogues contain clips from newspaper reports, I believe. Oh, that's absolutely right. That's a narrative style thing. We've played a bunch of these dossiers, Wheatley dossiers from the 30s. And I distinctly remember at the end of one of them where we read this long newspaper report of the trial. And immediately the light bulb went off on me. Like, this is a brilliant vehicle, because you're playing this game from first-person present perspective. And then you get this epilogue, this trial, which gives you the third-party view pulling back and commenting on you. Like, you're reading about how you testified and what the newspaper reporter thought and all the reactions. It's a fantastic way to have this ending epilogue shift in point of view, and perfectly suited for newspaper. So I think probably most of the epilogues will be told through newspaper article snippets. And you might get a couple, like the newspaper article, like in the sample I've written that Debbie has seen. You get the newspaper article that came out the day of the arrest, and then you get a little bit of the trial transcript, and then you get the newspaper 2 months down the line. Martina says, how would a radio broadcast be delivered to players? Just written? Yeah, I think just written. I mean, if someone wanted to record audio, that would be fine. But I'm thinking just written. And I remember The Watchmen, the graphic novel The Watchmen, had this amazing thing in it. It was a graphic novel. The Watchmen is a graphic novel. And in the novel, occasionally you get these little kind of page or two of the comic book, the horror comic book of the shipwreck, the pirate ship that this kid is reading in the novel. It's like a recursive little mini story. And to me, the radio broadcast felt like they could have that flavor. Like, you could be stumbling on little snippets of radio broadcast. You might catch a snippet of Abbott and Costello, a snippet of history being broadcast, and then a snippet of occasional cases that are happening in the world. So I really like the idea. One of the biggest problem with the newspapers, if you play Gumshoe has these big giant newspapers that are 90% irrelevant, and they're exhausting. And that's the real problem with these newspapers. They're either obviously about your case, or they feel like they're just making you read tons of information. And it's kind of a little bit exhausting and work. So I was thinking, could the radio snippets be done in such a way that you get a little bit of a time and a little bit of mix of history, entertainment, real history, real radio show, and little bits of snippets of cases that might be relevant to you. And because it would be broken up in such a way and scripted, I think it would be more controllable by the author. One of the problems with the newspapers now, this is an issue that's a little subtle, but that I harp on a lot, is my feeling is that the authors need to have more control over curating an experience. And one of the problems with the newspaper is you don't know if the person's going to read it at the beginning of the case or at the end of the case, and it really could shape things. So I like the idea of being able to drip out little snippets, half-page radio broadcasts that the player has to be attuned to and watching out for when they happen, to pick out, is there something relevant here? Or maybe something we heard yesterday on the radio is important, but in these little snippets. Okay, I'll come back to some questions in a second. Let me check if there's anything else. I think we're done. I mean, I haven't talked too much about time travel tourism, but I think I want to have locations that I want players to interact with real people in history. Does anyone remember what game it was where we met Ida Lupino? Was it one of the Postmortem LA games by Shaughnessy Bishop Stall? I think it was, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, there was one of these games where we went and talked to someone and we had a little interaction with Ida Lupino. And we're like, that's a weird name. Is that a real person? We went and looked it up. She was this famous, beautiful actress who was a director. And it was so cool to have this little brush with this historical figure. And in Sherlock Holmes, we constantly run into little snippets of history or people or phrases or places that we didn't know existed. So I want a lot of that. And so I like the idea of maybe putting in an excess amount, but tagging those leads so you know, okay, if I'm not in the mood to read this little historical thing, I can skip this lead. And I think that's fine. Mark Poole says, any thoughts of making this a PC, laptop, iPad based? It could store all the phone directories. You would still be able to play. I've got mixed thoughts. I mean, there's so much you could do with an app-based system that you have to go to extreme lengths to do it on paper, that I'm torn. But I think the thing to do is that this data is all going to be available as data, and we'll build this world. I'm inclined to try to make it all paper-based, low tech, but you could imagine that there could be digital versions of this that you could use, a digital database version, so you could easily search the directory instead of printing out. And you could imagine other versions of this that use these same directories, maps, locations, and everything. Use all the open world stuff in an app version. Tens, do you have a piece of computer software to help design these sort of things? If not, do you think it would be useful? Yeah, almost everything I've been writing is writing code. It's all Python for this. But yeah, I mean, I've written huge amounts of code to create all this. So I can create a new neighborhood. I can create a new world. I can repopulate it. I can change the densities, the ethnicities, the number of people. It's all in code. It's all programmatically generated. All the lead assignments, all the addressing, placing people. It's all in code and can be updated. So that'll all be open sourced as well in case someone wants to use it to make a game set in a different city, in a different neighborhood. And it would make it it would make it easier to make an app-based version of this or a PC game version of this if you wanted to. Let's see, anything else? Collaborators, I guess I should. First of all, huge thanks to everyone who has helped me already. There are a couple of people who have expressed interest in helping with the art, Adam Hall, and a couple of photographers who have old photographs of New York City. Michelle Hin has been working on the neighborhood guide that you saw all here, which is a huge amount of work, and doing the photographs. And eventually when that gets all filled out, it'll be really nice. And Rob and Nicola, I teased, but they have been very helpful in thinking through some of these things. Debbie Levy doing huge amounts of reading and editing and taking a bullet by reading all the spoiler stuff so she can't play it. And everyone else that I may have forgotten, Martinez, who may write a case for it. But I would love as much help as I can get. I have no vested interest in owning or controlling any of this. I've sketched out a big campaign and written some chapters, but I don't feel any real ownership. If someone wants to say, okay, I'll write case 3 in this campaign, great. Or you want to make your own detective and write a story that's completely different. You want to write some horror cases in this world with your own. You want to create your own custom detective. That's even better, because you write stuff, you write your own cases independently, I can play them, which would be a huge joy. So if you want to write independent cases in this world, I'd love to have collaborators. Artists produce the art, we can use it somewhere. If someone wants to help me write these specific 10 cases, chapters in my campaign that I've sketched out, I've got 2 chapters blocked out completely, but the other chapters are just, 5 lines of text. So if someone wants to help do that whole campaign with Jack Deverell and his career, and I can't tell you anything more about it because it'll spoil it, I'd be happy to have that. We're eventually going to need some serious playtesters. It's very hard to get playtesters for these kinds of games because you can only play it once, but people who would play it and give real feedback, people to look into the history of these things. I definitely need more people putting in the real famous places in New York City so that they're in there in the game so people can visit them, write little interactions for them, and make sure we get the important ones. You'll have to decide, as I said, if you want to be involved in the story back end of it, you'll have to decide, are you willing to know everything that happens and then you'll never be able to play it? Let's check in with the chat. Martina says, I feel I have a strong enough handle on High and Low. I might offer to help with the Jack Deverell campaign. Well, nothing would make me happier than Martinez helping with the campaign. Debbie says, have you thought of doing a Kickstarter to get more attention in playtesters? I mean, I have mixed feelings about Kickstarter. I do believe that this is not a commercially viable project, which is completely fine. This is a passion project. It's an art project, an experimental project, and I'm completely satisfied with that. Anyone who wants to get involved should know there's not going to be any money. I'm not going to get any money. You're not going to get any money. If I get money, you'll get money. That's how it's going to be. Don't count on any money. But it's conceivable that if we finished it, let's say we finished everything, we actually made the big campaign that would take you, 100 hours to play through, and other people wrote some independent cases, you could imagine a Kickstarter for it. It would be quite expensive, although people will be able to download and print their own copies. I would love to not have to be involved in that at all. If some company said, hey, we can print and bind the atlases, and we'll offer a set of this, and you could use it for any fan cases, and you use it for the campaign, and it costs $200. It's a very niche thing. It's not going to be cheap. Maybe the app version, if you just wanted to play it on the app, you could do that. Would all be free, but it's an option. But it's not important. If you do get involved, though, you will be able to put yourself in the directory. And if we did have a Kickstarter, one of the things we could offer is the higher level pledges could get themselves richer and fancier neighborhoods. So you give a big donation, you get yourself in a brownstone on the Upper East Side, you give a penny, you're in the tenement in the 20 apartment unit on the Bowery. All right, so we're basically done here. If you want to be involved in this in any way, I'd love it. You can contact me, you could comment on this video, you could follow the link in the description to the Board Game Geek Guild and comment on that thread, or you could email me. My address is, it's on this YouTube page. It's jessereichler@gmail.com. Let me just show you a couple whoops, that's not what I wanted. I wanted this. What's next? Okay, so we're going to do designer diaries once a month. I have entered a local board game contest that this is not suitable for, but it is helping me with deadlines. So that deadline is in February. So my goal is to lock in the maps and directories by the end of this year, and then write a little demonstration case that just shows some of the new stuff you could do tracking people with the reverse directory, and then have a short standalone sort of playable in an hour or so case by February, a sort of a sample case. And then I think it's going to take a year to write the campaign, but that's that. Okay. And I did want to recommend a couple of YouTube channels. The Dungeon Dive is the one that I've really my jaw has been dropping recently. He finds the most interesting sort of homebrew games, and he's working on his own game recently, and he's got a series, a designer diary for his game. And I find that fascinating. I like listening to him talk about these games and his design, so I would recommend that. Then there's a couple other channels talking about game design that I would recommend, that I've recommended in the past. And I did want to recommend a couple of these narrative mystery detective games that have been so influential for me. Dave Neal's Baker Street Irregulars, which I played all of these and reviewed all of these on the channel. That to me is still the best as a full experience, a big, giant, long, consistently good in every area, mystery-wise, writing-wise. It's hard to beat Dave Neal's box, and I don't think we're going to get such a generous box anytime soon. And if you want a different kind of a deep experience, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Adventures by Gaslight expansion, with Jonathan and I played for 30, 40 hours and had hundreds of emails back and forth discussing it. And Jonathan and I ended up writing a patch kit for it with a new map and a big hint system. That's partly why I got inspired about the hint system. You could check that out. And then Martinez Conrad's fan Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective cases are phenomenal. I made a video recommending 5 of them and talking about why they're so good. John Keene's Razorhurst was hugely influential, and it's so ironic because wasn't familiar with Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective at the time. And Razorhurst is sort of like an alternate reality Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective that does things differently and some things really well based on true story. Of any of them, that's the most special one. And then the Postmortem LA series, which was authored by the best writer of any of these, which is Shaughnessy Bishop Stall, who's a real writer. And those are worth playing almost just to see what it looks like when you get a novelist writing a game. So that's sort of the high watermark for me in terms of, can you think about real literature in these games that make you feel something? And check out that series. And then 2 historical games that are a little less successful, but really fascinating historically, and because they are set with this same sort of noirish detective stuff with fingerprints and criminal histories, are Gumshoe and Mugbook. Gumshoe is probably the closest to what we're doing here with High&Low. Doesn't quite work always, but it's definitely worth checking out. So there you have it. All right, so let's just relax for a second, have some tea, and does anyone have anything else they want to talk to? All right, so we went the full 2 hours. I'm sure we won't go 2 hours every every one of these, and we'll only be doing these once a month, but maybe we'll aim for an hour in the future. But I guess you got like a year's worth of pent-up dumping of information today. Anything else? Any ideas? I mean, I'm always happy to talk about game design ideas and brainstorm stuff. If you want to join in the Discord just to chat about stuff, I'm always happy about that. I don't think it's worth worrying about credit for ideas and stuff. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Always useful to just get them out there. And if someone can use them, great. Logan says, congratulations on all the work everyone has put in so far. It's impressive and inspiring. And Tina says, great work, everyone. Macon says, it looks amazing. I'm sorry I haven't formally, in written form, thanked all the contributors and people who have been helping me and encouraging me, but I absolutely will eventually. We will have you prominently given credit. John says, great work. Martina says, gotta run. This has been super useful. Thanks. Keep up the great work. I hope, I mean, my experience working on this has been mixed. Some days I feel great about it, and it's so exciting to see this big giant book. Only recently did the maps start looking reasonably good. For a long time, they looked very sterile and bad. And now that they sort of have a more, I guess it's a little hard to see, but a little bit more of a hand drawn feel. They're a little flat, but I'm starting to feel a little bit better about it. But basically, I've been spending 6 months writing a phone book simulator. That's how I describe it to people. Like, what have you been doing for 6 months? Oh, creating a fake phone book, making sure it's ethnically populated and in proper zoning districts for manufacturing. It's all fake phone book. Like, what am I doing with my life? That's how I feel half the time. And then half the time I'm like, All right, I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know if all of the work to try to make these places feel lived in and realistic is worth it, or even half as much work is worth it, but I do feel like if we're going to build a little world that people can write cases in, I want it to be deep enough that people find things to make mysteries around. And it's amazing that Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective 40 years later is people are still writing cases for that system. And I don't think we have any right to hope for something like that. But if a couple people can write a case for this and use the building blocks to make something fun, and if I can play it myself on the channel, boy, that would be the real pleasure. Don says, I stayed in the Washington Square Hotel, so I'd pay for a directory entry there. Logan says, you should all be proud. Can't wait to see the fan cases from other people. Possibilities are exciting. I really want to play these first 10 first. I said 6 months ago that the odds of this getting finished are like 5%. I'd say the odds of the world getting finished that people can make cases on are now like 90%. The odds of that 10-game campaign spanning 20 years, those are still low. The odds that I'll actually be able to get that finished are low. But Martinez Conradi is your best bet to have him. If he helms it, he is very fast at making these very good cases. So your best bet for getting that campaign is if I resign to helper and someone else takes over, or if we can divvy it up and get the outline and have different people write different cases. They're not really cases because I didn't talk about this, but they're chapters. So in my campaign arc, there's 10 to 12 chapters that span these different years. But a given case, in general, I don't want to give too much away, but in general, each chapter will wrap up a case. But some cases will span multiple chapters, and one case or two or a couple, I can't say, may span the whole campaign. So you're going to have little snack cases. You're going to have big, giant, serious cases that span. Well, Gumshoe does this a little bit too. And so the campaign is meant to be a continuing story. It's not a box of 10 separate cases. It's cases that are ongoing. And Logan says, imagine cases that are in Dutch or German that we have to translate. I mean, I really would love the idea of someone making a case in this world that we could play on the channel would be really a delight. That would be the most rewarding thing of all. All right, anything else to talk about? Anyone else in the channel want to talk about any project they're working on? Mickey Hedman says, exciting stuff this, keep it up. I do appreciate all the encouragement. It's clear that getting feedback about this stuff and encouragement really does make a huge difference in terms of morale and motivation. It's much funner to work on a project if people like it. Not sure what the right size is for these maps. 8.5 or 11 is certainly easier to print and manufacture, but it feels like a pretty small. It is readable. It is convenient. A3 11 by 17s are much more enjoyable to work with. You can really think about it like a proper board game map. Tenzrut says it's about time. The design of narrative games made some significant breakthroughs. Well, who knows how much of it's going to actually work, but I do think it's worth experimenting and sort of putting some of these theories to the test. I'm sure some of them will turn out to be easier said than done. Maybe some of them will backfire, but it's worth exploring ideas and having a little laboratory to try some of these ideas. I harp on some of these critiques and suggestions for long enough. It's worth trying to put my money where my mouth is. All right, I'm sure there'll be lots more to talk about going forward. Thank you all for joining me here. It is a pleasure. If you watch this after the fact, after it's live, please do comment ideas, suggestions, thoughts. If you want to get involved, you can contact me or post here or on the Board Game Geek Guild. Yeah, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.